Right, Angus.
Yep.
You know what to do.
I do.
Clap us in. Welcome along to the Whisky Stories podcast with myself, Graham Cogar. We are back, but we are not in the Athletic Arms. We are in the InchDairnie Distillery as part of our first ever collaboration. We have a sponsor, lads.
We do. Yeah,
we got a sponsor, Ross. You said to me, if you keep
Are we
saying...
still looking for sponsorship?
No, not anymore. For the month of May, anyway, that's for sure.
Anyway.
Because this is part of a huge collaboration with InchDairnie Distillery as part of the release of two of their first ever single malts. And we are joined by Distillery Manager Scott Sneddon. Scott, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for coming.
You're living the dream. You're sitting here with the Whisky Stories podcast.
Yes, I am living the dream.
No, because you got in touch with us after the episode, I think it was the Lady of the Glen.
Correct.
Because if you remember correctly, we tried the first ever labelled Fife regional release of whiskey.
Accidentally mislabelled, I believe.
Due to an accidental error on the label.
Error. Yeah.
But we tried KinGlassie,
Yes.
and we were suddenly scratching our heads a little bit going, hang on. And so it's KinGlassie from InchDairnie Distillery. We were trying to work out, to be honest, like, how does this work?
We didn't really know, yeah.
We didn't know whether how you brought out a single malt release and we didn't know about it, or is this someone's got access to liquid and things like that. You've since just taken us on a tour around the distillery, an incredible tour. Ross uses a phrase, had my tail wagging. His tail was wagging. But that is available as an exclusive vlog, which will be on our YouTube channel, so people can check it out. But yeah, you guys got in touch and you said, listen, you listen to the podcast, you want to get us along, you want to show us this fantastic distillery that you've got, which is actually closed
Yes.
to the public. So we've been very blessed. So yeah, here we are. We've got a dram in front of us.
This is a historic day.
It is.
This is a historic day. You've been open 10 years, you've been here since day one, and this is the day that your first ever official single malt has been released. Congratulations.
As of
Thank you.
today,
Genuinely,
if
congratulations.
you're listening to this podcast right now, the KinGlassie Double Matured and the KinGlassie Raw are now available to purchase. How good does that sound?
It's a long time coming.
Yeah.
It's a long time coming, as I said, but we've had a lot of good feedback from people to this point, because it's encouraging, because by waiting for 8 years as well, we wanted to make sure we had a liquid that was going to meet the demands and requirements of our customers.
Now, you've been at the distillery, from pretty much the duration of the time here.
I'm employee number 2,
You're employee number
but
2.
behind the founder.
Wow, so you were basically the first person to found it. So was it like someone's gone out and actually, we need Scott in here. This is what we need. We've got a lovely area here which is going to be turned into distillery. Let's go out and find the right man. And you were the guy that ticked the boxes.
I was the right man, yes.
Right, fantastic.
Did you know the founder before? Or?
No, I didn't. I knew of him, but I didn't know him personally.
So who's the founder? Sorry, are we allowed to?
So the founder is a gentleman called Ian Palmer. So Ian's been in the industry for over 40 years, 47 years to be exact. But he's been in the industry for a long time.
And I don't want you to speak on behalf of Ian, but you'll maybe have a rough idea. But what makes somebody go, I want to build a distillery and I want to start producing, but I also want to, first of all, here's where I want to do it. So they've picked this location. And secondly, the style and type of distillery that this is. Because it's very unique. And we're going to dive into that.
It's very unique. So why here?
Yeah.
Well, to have a distillery, you need to have sufficient land. So that meets the requirement. But also, you have to have power. You have to have fuel for your boiler. And you need to have effluent. You have to have somewhere for that to go. So this is a crossroads of lots of those services. We have water that is just in the perimeter of our fence. We have gas that comes from the mains that leads from Glenrothes to KinGlassie. We also have the main effluent line that goes to the Glenrothes anaerobic digestion plant that goes from KinGlassie into Glenrothes. And being in an industrial estate has power.
Yeah.
So those are the 4 key things you need to run a distillery.
Well, I mean, I can't believe I've not mentioned this already, but we are in the kingdom. We are in Fife. We are sitting here in a distillery in Fife, in Glenrothes. And as you've mentioned, we were just out for a little stroll. We thought, Angus, Ross...
We usually do a lot of walking on the podcast.
Angus, Ross, Chuck and I said, you know what we really fancy doing today? Let's hit up an industrial estate in central Fife in Glenrothes. So we picked one, and slap bang at the end of it, we saw these massive gates, and we thought, what's in there? It looks like a distillery.
That's it. And the microphone spawned onto our hands.
And we had a cameraman here. It was so
by magic.
But it is. We're in an industrial estate in Glenrothes in Fife. And at the end, and like I say, you can go through these gates, and suddenly you're just literally transported into an absolutely fantastic looking, lovely looking distillery. And you've given us a tour, and I said, like, you get to see this on our YouTube channel. Check it out, please do. But ultimately, like, that's where we are. So was it always an intention to make a Fife distillery, or was it just the fact that of all the areas of land, this is the bit that worked best?
The founder stays in Milnathorpe,
Right.
so he didn't want to travel too far.
Makes sense.
Right.
And to get the right area was here. The original site was actually planned in Leslie, because the original company was called John Ferguson Company.
All right.
And John Fergus was a mill owner, and he was very good to his employees. He had this really good employee-owner relationship. However, the land wasn't suitable. So it was taking that concept, and this was the land that met all the other requirements.
Fantastic. And we are in Fife, so the fences are a wee bit larger than you would have in
they're
it.
12, they're 12 feet rather than being 8 feet.
It is worth saying, we've been around the distillery. It's a beautiful distillery, but it's a distillery that's not open to the public.
it's not.
And so that's why we are super lucky to be here. I have had InchDairnie before. Now, I've had InchDairnie's Rye Whisky. Now, of course, we've tried the malt whisky when we've done the Lady of the Glen, but I've had an official bottling from you before, and actually you poured a wee dram for us, so we'll give you a wee cheers and a thanks
Aye.
for welcoming
Oh,
us as
aye,
well.
aye.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Wow, yeah, thank you. But
And
it's,
so that pulls up the first question straight away in terms of a distillery. You've just spoke about the launch of your first single malt, but you've released a rye, a Scottish rye, or a Scottish single grain, as we should call it.
Yes.
Tell us a bit about that.
So the
We
fundamental
started there. That was
the fundamental guiding principle of the distillery is flavour.
yeah.
So Ian, the founder, was feeling that the industry was looking more of what was outside the bottle than what was inside the bottle. So when I joined the business, there was other distilleries being formed and being fairly new. And the guiding principles, as we said, is not just another whiskey distillery.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's not detracting from everybody else. We want to do it in a slightly different way. So as a distillery, we do, at the moment, 9 different styles of spirit.
Yeah, because that
You're making
that's
it, make it
incredible.
hard on yourself.
Yeah.
Because right. When I like to go back the conversation. So you're sitting there with the founder who said, right, listen, was it a case of this guy's giving you a briefing? I want to build a distillery, and you're going, okay, yep, we could do that. Right, and I want to build a distillery that does this style of whiskey. Yeah, we could do that. But I also want to do it another 8 ways of doing it, and I want to use different grains, and I want to do all the different ways that I've got an idea. Or was it a sort of collaboration of we can do it like this and let it evolve into that?
It was that. It was a case of, you'll have noticed when we went round, we don't have the traditional equipment.
Yeah.
So by not starting with the traditional equipment, it means you can start having the conversations as, how can we use this equipment to the benefit?
Yeah, so I was going to say, can you just run through the different styles and what each of them is?
Yes,
Just so everyone listening can understand.
So we have
What
9
the
styles.
names of them as well?
So we have Strathenry and Finglassie, which people have heard about.
Yeah.
So Strathenry and Finglassie is what we call the blending malt.
Right.
That's about 70% of what I produce is to those 2 products.
Sure.
Those products we then sell to third-party people. And that then funds the other 7 that we produce ourselves. We don't produce a vodka, we don't produce a gin. So that is the business model.
Right.
So then we go to the other 7. So keeping to malt whiskey, we have InchDairnie. So that is 4 seasons, because what we do is we embrace the seasonality of the weather. So we do a spring campaign, a summer campaign, an autumn campaign, and a winter campaign.
And now wait a minute. Is that 4 of your releases, or is that just 4 of InchDairnie as a release?
It's not out yet.
It's not
No,
out yet.
but what I mean is, like, is your spring, summer, autumn, winter ones?
With different styles of distillation.
Yeah, but
They're
are
different
they different? Are they part of the 9?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
So they're part of the 9. So that then gives you 4 plus 2 gives you the 6. So the
Yep.
other 3 is KinGlassie, which is our peated. We also then have our rye.
Yeah.
And then the final one is more a brand rather than an individual spirit. And we call that Prinlaws. So
Okay.
Prinlaws is experimentation. So to give you an idea, we've done an oats whiskey, a wheat
Okay.
whiskey, a pot still whiskey. We've done a sour mash whiskey. We've used Munich malt. Munich malt being what you get high kilned for beer. And we've also done some landrace variety of barley.
Wow.
So we could do a separate podcast, I think, just on that.
Well,
Listen, 'cause there's so many amazing
that
questions.
subject, as part of this collaboration with you, not only are you inviting us into this distillery to give us a look around and give people an idea because it's close to the public, not only are you giving us an opportunity to try this whiskey as part of your new release, but also we are doing our first ever distillery spotlight event. Instead of an indie bottler spotlight, we are doing a distillery spotlight event, which will be at the Diggers on Friday the 23rd of May. So people who are listening are thinking, right, I want to try it. Now you're going to be bringing along, you don't have to tell us what they are just there, but there'll be at least 5 drams on there from part of these releases.
Yes.
You know, and it's incredible. And like you say, we've just been for a walk around and you're showing us all the different variations of how you make the different sort of these different brands or products. But I'm just thinking there, you're naming them. I'm like, is it like having 9 kids? Right? Is it like sitting there and going, right, I've got 9 kids and you try to remember all their names. And do you have a favourite?
He's got 7 he keeps inside and 2 he lets out.
So I don't have a favourite because we're proud and passionate about each and every one.
Yeah. But what you have done is you've chosen, and we'll get onto it more as we talk about it, but you've chosen the KinGlassie to be the first one that you've released as a single malt. So that in itself, you've decided to go with a peated malt, which isn't something you maybe, I know we're in the Fife region, but in the Lowland region, it's not something, typically associated with. So, that's a decision you've had to make as well.
Yeah, what was the thinking there? Obviously, you've waited 8 years, you've showed a lot of patience.
Yes.
We would suggest, from having had lots of whiskey, especially distilleries that you enjoy in particular, Angus, that at a young spirit, by the way, 8 now is a well-matured spirit. We're drinking 8-year-old whiskey every day and not realising it. To have a proud age statement, you're proud of this spirit, but 8 years old and peated, well, we know that peat works really well with slightly younger spirit anyway. Was that the thinking of releasing this before you?
So what we've done is, for each of the defined brands, we've kind of asked ourselves a question. So for the rye whiskey's traditionally been mainly American rye.
Yeah.
So people have a perception of it. So what we wanted to do is to take that concept and give it a bit of a contemporary twist. And what I mean by that is the rye for us is quite easy to drink. It's quite, we call it, a Scottish sipping rye.
And you're giving it that virgin oak.
We're giving that virgin oak. We're also bringing
traditionally. Yeah.
And what we bring is it's malted rye, not unmalted rye.
Okay.
And for it we use the Lomond still. I know that you like to Lomond Still Ross.
Which is amazing. Yeah.
So for the KinGlassie, with it being a peated, people have when you say a peated whiskey, they automatically think of Isle of peated whiskey and what that brings. And people are very much, I had a bad experience when I was younger reading my father's cabinet.
Yeah,
so it tends to put them off. So what we wanted to do is by looking at peated malt, is what can we do differently with the equipment we have here. So we chose it to be mainland peat, not Isle of peat, mainland peat. So because of that, it's not got that depth that you would associate it. It's heavily peated, it's 50 ppm.
So it has a heavy peat.
It has a peat, but what we've done is we wanted to, by doing it through our process, it becomes a lot more smoke forward. There is a little bit of fruitiness within it as well. So by giving us that fruitiness, we can then bring in more flavours. So it's not just a peat hit. There's actually some flavour and some complexity within it.
And now the question, obviously, we've got this far into the podcast. I've already mentioned we are in the Kingdom of Fife. Barley, talk to me. Right, where are we getting the barley from? Are we dealing with Fife barley?
Yes, so for all of the
best barley in the world.
All of the InchDairnie brands is Fife grown.
Love it.
Wow, so your rye is from Fife.
So the rye, for the first year, the rye that we had here was grown in the Black Isle because it takes time to grow it and then to harvest it. Mm-hmm. So this was distilled in 2017. Mm-hmm. So the liquid from 2019 has all been grown since.
You can kind of tell, to be honest.
I think it's worth saying for people that maybe aren't rye drinkers. I would not call myself a rye drinker, but this is much sweeter on the nose, lighter and more approachable to drink than we associate with American.
I think this is probably the first rye I've ever tried.
Because when you have rye whiskey, what you expect is spice.
Well, and also I would say that there's an element of my we've talked about this a lot in the podcast, is my previous conceptions and misconceptions of drinking, is I would say for grain whiskey and rye whiskey and foreign whiskey, I'd say what's the point when I could just drink single malt Scotch?
Yeah.
Right, I could go to a bar like the Diggers, look on the bar list, there's a recognisable brand, I know them, And again, other conceptions that we've had, or misconceptions, is new distilleries, new whiskey, it's not great because it's new. Why would I drink an 8-year-old when I would go to get a Glenfiddich 15? And it's a recognised brand, so I don't need to worry about the quality and all that kind of stuff. It's been there for hundreds of years, and it's a 15-year-old whiskey, so it's a solid age statement. Now, new whiskey distilleries get us really, really excited, and new types of whiskey. We've talked about world whiskey, and now we're drinking rye. And I think this will be I think this is the first time I've ever tried rye whiskey, and it's absolutely
what do you think of it?
Absolutely. I mean, I've nearly finished it. I need
by the
another
way,
one.
See the fact that the first rye you're having is a Scottish rye.
Aye.
That's brilliant. Scottish.
Fife rye.
Well, of course.
Well, when we're talking about Scottish rye, and you, as you mentioned, it's all local farmers. How much did they curse you out when they started growing rye? I mean, was it a painful process for them? Or?
No, we've been growing the spring barley and the winter barley for the InchDairnie on the farm since the very beginning.
Okay.
So we had that relationship. And actually, growing the rye is not the problem for using rye. It's the processing of the rye is the difficulty. Rye as a grain will actually grow in quite thin and not so fertile conditions.
Okay.
So it's really a hardy. It gives you quite a good height. You get a lot of straw from it. So it's got a lot of benefits. The problem with rye is it's got a high level of beta-glucans, which basically means it goes into like wallpaper paste when it's in the mash tun.
Okay.
That's where there's a difficulty in processing of it.
And I think that one of the things that we've seen with this distillery, and like we're going back to that journey that you went on with the founder and the conversations he's having with you. You know, were you hearing these conversations and going, this is going to be mental? Or are you listening to these conversations going, this is going to be incredibly difficult to do, but really exciting? Or were you actually getting involved and saying, no, let's go to the next level and try it this way, try it that way?
We, at the very start, the fundamental was getting the distillery built and up and running. Mm-hmm. And then we had a concept for the InchDairnie single malt being the seasons. So the very first year, 2016, was proving that concept and that yeast. It was during that where we got the confidence that what we had here, the equipment, was enable us to get that different character. We then started dabbling in more. We then brought in the peated whiskey, and then in 2017, we started doing the rye. And that's then given us, if we've done rye, we can do wheat. If we do wheat, we can do oats. Yeah. So you gain confidence in what you can do, and you learn. I mean, it's not been plain sailing. You know, some of the early days of the rye was really, really difficult to process, even with equipment. But we learned and understood the product and overcame it to then produce it. So it's very, very much as the scope of the role was very open-ended.
Yeah.
It was really much how we can do. There was nothing off the table about not being able to try it.
And of course, 10 years ago, you know, we've talked about it so much on the pod about the boom of new distilleries. It's a great time to be a whiskey drinker. It's absolutely fantastic. We're seeing so many new distilleries. So you're obviously starting a distillery round about the same time as others are starting them. So how much of you are you keeping quiet to yourselves of what you're doing because you know how different you're being? So when you do start to get to the stage where you can release products, you can start saying, we are doing this and this and this, versus other distilleries that might just say, look, we're just here to make single malt and that's what we do. So how much of that were you trying to keep it under wraps, or have you been very open about it?
We're very open.
Right.
As you know, within the industry, it's very a supportive network.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been to most of the new distilleries myself. So we were very open to this is what we're doing, and when people hear about you, they want to come and visit you like here.
Yeah.
We're very open with what we're doing because it's all about the perception of Scots for the benefit. When I came here 10 years ago, the focus was more on the maturation site and not on the different liquid creation. And that's what interested me here, is here we are looking at different grains, looking at different yeasts, looking at different distillation processes, as well as looking at the different maturation processes.
And you're coming at it from an engineering background, and that's where we've had so many different guests on the podcast, like Jake Adcook and things like that will say, like, I just love the engineering. And that's what's fascinating when you come to a new distillery, is you get to see that you're able to engineer flavour. Whereas a distillery from 100 years ago, it's a lot of that flavour is maybe just because we do it like this, because this is the way we've always done it. Or accidentally, you hear about the stories of, what was it, Rosebank? And Rosebank used to have two smaller stills, and the reason that it had two smaller stills at the far end was just literally down to the fact that that was the only way we could fit them into the room.
Yep.
And that's accidentally created a flavour profile that's completely different. Whereas you guys, and your involvement is you're getting to engineer that. So where do you start with that when you've literally got an empty field and you're starting to look at, right, we need to put pipes in here and work like that?
To start with, you've got a P&ID, piping and instrumentation diagram.
Say that again, sorry.
P&ID.
P&ID.
So it's piping and instrumentation diagram.
Brilliant.
So as an engineer, that basically tells me how we connect distills to the condensers to all the other processes. So that's where you start as your fundamental. So that gets the equipment in. It's then the question is, now that we have the equipment, what can we do with it?
Yeah.
So as I said, the guiding philosophy for the distillery is the 3 M's: material, method, and maturation. So when we're coming up with a concept or looking at either reading articles or hearing other people, we go, okay, let's try that. I mean, simple things like rye. We're hearing a lot about rye. Let's try rye. When you're talking about rye, I mean, how rye came about is there was a 1908 Royal Commission where the agents of the Crown went around Scotland and Ireland recording what was there. And during that, they said they'd malted barley, but they also had rye, oats, and wheat. So there you go, you've got rye, oats, and wheat. So let's try and process them. So you're using this historical information to then move forward to trying something new.
Yeah, and because I mean, we're talking about your rye whiskey. If we go back a wee bit, I've tried a couple of rye whiskies. I think European rye, like Finnish whiskey, maybe. And the thing I got predominantly, I remember
The Cairo or something like that.
really kind of barnyardy, farmyardy,
Yeah, funky.
I don't get that off
No,
this. I'm
I
just
would-
nosing it rather than
I would
tasting
totally agree with you, Angus.
That's what I was expecting. 'Cause
Yeah.
Obviously, that's what I've had before. I was expecting something very sort of, agriculture.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
kind of agriculture.
I think a lot
I'm
of
not
people.
getting that at all.
I think a lot of people as well. When we say rye, a lot of people maybe think straight rye,
Yeah.
and so a lot of the ryes that you're talking about, and that I've also experienced,
Almost
it's kind
steeliers, can I
of sometimes
say?
a kind of wet cardboard or a funkiness in the nose. It's because it's a very high rye mash bill, so it could be up to 100% rye. Whereas actually your rye is not like that. You're doing actually again that homage to rye we know in America and Canada.
Yeah, it's a bit, I mean, when you look at how to make rye whiskey, there's no rules and regs. It's not something that's been predominantly used. So you look to America, and then they say it's got to be a minimum of 51%
So they just
rye.
ask for a majority. Yeah.
So then it has to be put into a cask at less than 63% and has to be in virgin oak cask. So rye law was 53% malted rye. We put it into the cask at 63 and it's in virgin oak cask. So
Yeah.
that was the only guiding principles that we had.
Because you've
we
approached it exactly how they
And
approached
is
it.
there, is, there not, is there not a little bit of dubiety over rye at the moment or anything like that with regards to what you can call it and how it can be named?
Yes, at the moment we can't call it a rye whiskey
Right.
because there's no definition under the current regs. So we have to call it a single grain whiskey.
But you can call it rye law.
So rye law. So we name our spirit after areas surrounding the distillery. So
Yeah.
Rye law is a Rye law farm is less than 100 metres.
Yeah, because I mean,
That's brilliant.
You're
It's a happy
mentioning,
That's
coincidence,
brilliant.
isn't it?
a very happy coincidence.
you're mentioning some of the different names of your 9 kids, and you're saying about the KinGlassie, where we are located is right beside and KinGlassie is what we would sort of commonly call it over in Fife. But what was the other one? Was it
Prinlaws.
Prinlaws as well? That's not far away.
So that's not from me. And the Strathenry and the KinGlassie are in that direction.
Yeah.
There. And then InchDairnie is the area where here.
And where's your barley grown then? Because you mentioned it's locally grown.
So the barley is grown in the Balgonia estate.
Yeah.
So
And that's right. So Colton of Balgonia is just along the road there as well.
it's about 5 miles away from the
Yeah,
distillery.
and it's malted. It can't be malted locally.
No, it's malted in through. We use Muntons, and they malt the barley in their various locations.
They, I believe, if I'm getting this right, they were the ones that bought the maltings off the farm.
that's
of
what
Hiram Walker.
Sorry, I thought you were going to say is I believe they're able to peat malt too.
No. So basically, so Muntons bought Robert
wow.
Colger and Co in Kirkcaldy. So if they hadn't closed it, then there's every chance that it would have been malted just
Correct.
literally within. And again,
That's cool.
when you look at you've talked when we went through about the energy efficiency, all that kind of stuff, and we hear a lot within the industry about people talking about we want to try and be as conscious of the footprint that we're having and things. So is that something the distillery is looking at
Yes,
as well?
I mean, we did a carbon footprint study a few years ago, and what we found is that the main component for the carbon footprint is the growing and malting of the barley.
Yeah.
So we've been working with Muntins and they've been reducing their carbon footprint. We're also working for the farmer to see how can we reduce the carbon footprint on the growing of the barley. As we were going around the site today, with the increasing capacity and expansion, we also have a new boiler, and that boiler is hydrogen ready. So when we have the infrastructure, we can convert to be running on hydrogen rather than natural gas.
Your infrastructure here is unbelievable, and I think even if InchDairnie is a new distillery to some of us and to the listeners, viewers, you're here for the long run. Your production, your capacity's 4 million, you were saying,
Yes.
and you're doing about 2 million now. You're not mucking about.
Yeah, it's not an artisanal. We're not dealing with an artisanal
we're
distillery, are we?
And you know, we look at the fact that you've waited 8 years, and it seems like a bit of a luxury, but also because we've tried a lot of new spirits, or people reach 3 years old and they put something in it because they have to. It is quite nice. You've got this luxury. You've waited until this product was ready for us.
Yes.
Well, you look around the estate here, everything's stored on site, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Well, the warehouse is great.
I got the wet floor sign had to come out when I go into that distillery. Let me tell you, because into that warehouse. But like, yeah, we had Nicole Leslie on the podcast a couple of weeks ago.
That's right.
Last week I think it was right.
Yeah.
Fascinating about Bonington, and
Yeah.
we talked, Holyrood Distillery, Portleaf Distillery. They get the headlines.
Artisanal.
They get headlines in
Yeah,
Edinburgh.
yeah.
Bonington, there's a lot, myself included.
Yeah.
We're like,
Well,
we've never
they're
really
not
heard of it.
open
Not open to the public.
And again, with
yeah.
InchDairnie, when you're the benefit of being Portleaf and you create a distillery that's going to be a visitor centre as
Yeah.
well as a working distillery, it's vertical, it's got all the sort of that uniqueness. People are talking about it already.
Yeah.
There will be people who suddenly see the KinGlassie hitting the shelves. They'll maybe seen the Rye Law and they'll have gone, who's that? InchDairnie, and again, they've never heard. So how much of a splash do you think this is going to make in the market? Because people are going to be looking at it going, never heard of this place, didn't know it existed. And of course, they're going to flood to the YouTube channel and watch our vlogs, see what it's all about.
I
But
think just before you answer that, Scott, I guess the difference is truly the focus is on the liquid here.
Yes.
You could be a very busy visitor centre if you opened those gates, but actually, especially showing with the experimentation and willing to, you'll probably get things wrong along the way. You've only been going for 10 years. You're using different yeast strains. You're using different barley varieties. We'll get into that. We'll give the mic to Chuck and let him ask as many technical questions as he can think of. But you're all about what's in the bottle. And so if people need to try a new distillery, you want to try a new distillery, you don't know it. It's actually, you're not going to be able to go, yeah, great, I'm going to visit there next week. But you can say this is where they're starting at 8 years old, 46.3%, natural colour, non-chill filter, all the good stuff. And what a great platform to start on.
But yeah, I mean, like I was saying though, like it must be a slight hurdle to say. And I know you're predominantly on the production side, but that decision, was that an early decision that we don't want people coming in because we want to focus on making the whiskey first?
Yes, I mean, a lot of the distilleries, if you think about it, to really utilise visitors, you need more staff.
Yeah.
Because you're a really nice guy. You've been a great host to us. It's not like you don't like people.
No, we wanted to be focusing on understanding the distillery and making good whiskey. It's only now that we feel that we have whiskey that we want to be sharing with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Do it when we're ready.
Yeah.
Because you remember, until today, they wouldn't have anything to talk about.
Yeah.
So why would they come and visit the distillery if they couldn't actually get something?
Well, that's it. But I suppose from a business model perspective, though, distilleries look at it and say, if we, listen, let's not beat around the bush. It costs an absolute fortune to run a distillery on a day-to-day basis,
Yes.
and then you have that situation where, for the first 3 years, we can't even release anything until there's only so many people that are interested in trying new make spirit or anything like that. So there's obviously that element. Now, going to your Rye Law product, then, how long did it take before you could start putting out Rye Law? How long what's the regulations, and when do you make the decision that it's right and ready to go into the
for the Rye Law, it's like anything else for grain, it's 3 years.
You're right.
But for us, because it's in virgin wood, you're getting a lot of extractives.
Mm-hmm.
And also, there is a bit of an unknown on how it's going to mature.
Yeah.
So when it came to the Rye Law, after 5 years, we felt we were getting a very good balance of the wood influence, the flavours coming from that, which is the vanilla and caramel coming from that new virgin oak, but still having that spice from it. So that's where the decision was taken, that we felt that was at the right
Yeah.
point
So-
to be releasing it.
Yeah, because I mean, like, we've talked about, you could bring out a gin, you could bring out a vodka, you could do all that, and again, it's cost.
I think it's the transparency of being like 70% of our production, which is a lot of production, is going to third parties. Because that is
so that's where a lot.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Because
from an indication point of view, right? And I know you don't want to, you might not be able to give away too much here, but the question I'd like to know is like, on a rough basis, like I don't know if you could break it down to per day, per week, per month, per year, but what is the kind of cost of a working distillery, roughly?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, if you think about it, so a ton of malt will give you maybe 400 litres of alcohol. So a ton of malt can range between £600 and £700 a ton. A virgin oak cask, one cask can be about £800-900.
Yeah.
So that's the when you start looking.
And then there's the energy costs.
Well, there's the energy costs.
Keeping the lights on.
Keeping the lights
Staffing.
on. Staff. It costs. There's millions to put in infrastructure.
Yeah.
But then there's millions to keep your production going.
Yeah.
And that, like I say, I mean that's the bit that you've just mentioned, the cost just on casks and on buying the malt. You don't have to bring in then, of course, salaries and everything like that on top of it, and the energy. So it is a huge commitment. And
it is a huge commitment, but when Ian Palmer was coming up with the distillery, it was a business first. From the concept to hitting the ground was 3 years in the making.
Yeah. Because
it was about getting the business
Yep.
right.
Mm-hmm.
So when you get the business right, then you can then lead. That gives you the right foundation.
And it's we talked about it in the during the vlog there during the tour, and we mentioned I mentioned about the fact that one of the last distillery tours that we did was with the guys up in Dornoch, and you're seeing guys that that is an artisanal brand that they're bringing out at the moment, and they've got their plans for Stray and stuff, but you're seeing they're wanting to go rewind the clock a little bit and say we want to use traditional barley strains, we want to use traditional yeast strains, we want to do it that kind of way to bring out a spirit and a whiskey that will taste like what it used to taste like however many years back. Yeah. You've got a different approach. You're saying we want to experiment, we want to be up there, and we've seen your control centre is computerised.
You've gone a different approach, but kind of with the same ideal. Because
It's still original
Well,
spirit.
I was going to say we've done it the same way because we went back to the 1908 Royal Commission.
Of course.
We went backwards to learn how that was to go forwards.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of information about how things were. So for us, it's all about the quest for flavour.
Yeah.
That's why that's quite a broad, but that's the approach that
You're
we're
just
looking
making
for.
a
We're asking, we're asking the questions. Can we do a peated whiskey that's not the intensity that people either love or hate? Can we do? We've got a history of using rye whiskey. Can we using our equipment make a rye whiskey? So we're actually asking fundamental questions about flavour and seeing what we can do with equipment.
And this is probably a good point for us to really get into that production side of the distillery.
Well, I've got one question to ask first. Right, before we go on, we were at, actually the three of us, Ross, myself and Angus, were at a tasting last night, a Glen Scotia tasting, and we were hearing all about that traditional Campbelltown flavour profile.
The region is, I think, because of the limited amount of distilleries in the region is very important to the story of Glen Scotia.
Yeah,
and they were saying, when they were going through their releases, they were saying, you'll notice that this is, strong
Campbelltown funk and all that. But it raised the question, and I was saying about Campbelltown being a recognised, area, region of Scotland, right? So I'm asking, right, okay, well, so you've got how many distilleries are in Campbelltown? There's 3. You need 3 by the SWA guidelines. 3. I think you know where I'm going here. You need 3 distilleries to be recognised as a region. How many distilleries have we got in Fife right now, Ross? Come on.
Are you counting Eden Mill?
Yes. They've got
Eden Mill, Daft Mill, Kings Barnes, Linders Abbey, InchDairnie.
And Cameron Bridge.
Grain Distillery.
Can I slightly interrupt by saying that Campbelltown was whiskey production capital for Scotland for quite a long
Yeah.
period of time.
Was being the key phrase there.
I think for the world.
And they're going to lose their regional status.
Yeah.
I'd say do your time, kid.
Do your time, kid.
I like that, Charles.
No, but I mean, but when like regional flavour profiles,
But they're not trying to focus on regional.
No, of course.
Profiles here.
But from your own point of view, then you're looking at. I want.
Just shoehorn of your own agenda.
Yeah,
Of course it is. It's absolutely.
But then you're not. But basically, what InchDairnie is a highlight of is there couldn't be, even if Fife became a whiskey region, there couldn't be a Fife whiskey flavour profile.
No, of course not.
Because we're introducing a heavily peated lowland single malt.
But I just love so yeah, I mean, your whole
9 different variants.
9 different variants that are pretty much all named after areas of Fife. So there's obviously a key to the element of like we have the heritage of
Proud
Fife.
of where they're, yeah.
You're looking at this Fife barley that you're using, best barley in the world, of course, and you've got all that kind of stuff that is going on.
Tap water.
Fife tap water. You're using the Fife water source. It's all very very localized and things like that. But from that, I just love the idea that this is a distillery that's 10 years old as well. So when you actually break down and look at all the distilleries that are in Fife, you must be up there with one of the oldest now out of the 6. You know, when you look at it, you're 10 years old, you've got, but yet people will still say, I've never heard you because you've never seen a full release. Is that something that you guys are focused on with the heritage of Fife and with looking at pushing that agenda as well?
Yeah, I mean,
Do
if
they
you
want a Fife region?
if you
You don't have to answer that question, but no, but like
to answer your point about Fife, I mean, we are proud that we grow our grains in Fife, we distill in Fife, and we mature in Fife. If you look in both the bottles of the Rye Law and in the KinGlassie, it says Fife within the label because we are proud. It doesn't say Lowlands, it says Fife because we are proud of being within Fife. We are talking to the other distilleries to see if there's something that we can do to either work together to showcase that Fife as an area has a lot of
And
good
what a
distilleries.
unique opportunity for this area.
Exactly. It's about
Golf courses and distilleries.
golf
I mean,
courses.
my eyes are lighting up.
well, this is the furthest west of Fife there is, isn't there? Because actually, when you look at there is a cluster
Yes.
where you start to look at when you go, you're looking at Eden Mill, Daft Mill, Lindors Abbey, and King's Barnes. They're all very close to each other in that area. So in this neck of the woods, you're not that far away. You're quite distance from them, even though you're still on the path in Fife. But no, it's a fascinating concept here, and I love the fact that the swerving of, and I think you said it in the last podcast, we don't want to piss anyone at the SWA off, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time,
Aye,
that navigating that on the labelling, I mean, even putting Fife without identifying it as a region, that must have to be a tricky sort of path to tread.
The regs for labelling, it means it has to be a GI in Fife because of the government location can be recognised as being in Fife.
Yeah.
So we meet the requirements by calling it Fife.
Yes.
Right.
But it is an interesting discussion because I mean we've had it before as well, Graham, kind of on and off camera, because you will get people that will say, well, region doesn't matter.
No.
So call yourself Fife, but that doesn't really matter. You know.
But it's funny how it doesn't. It doesn't. I don't know
wants
why
to
it matters.
champion the area he's from, and I totally
No,
get that.
it's also just like there's an element of pride where, like, look, the
It's
guys at
amazing.
Glen Scotia puffed their chest out. We're Campbelltown. There was only 3 left, and they told a great story about how I think when Glen Scotia was close to having to be, they had workers weren't there. The guys from Springbank went over to work the distillery, so it didn't
and
shut.
how
So they
Glengyle Distillery
maintained.
saved the region.
So there's that element, but I don't know what it is. There's a nice feeling where you can say, like, well, we create whiskey and we create good whiskey, recognisable whiskey, and whiskey that can be transported across the world.
I think because you've got the history in Fife of the barley and
Yeah.
the malting,
Yeah.
and I totally get that.
I mean, it's
do.
international market, something
I
that you
think-
guys
yeah.
are conscious of as well.
Yes, I mean it is. I mean for Rylaw, the first product, that's in 20 countries around
Yeah.
the world. And with KinGlassie, it's the hope that will then follow it. Of
Yeah.
course, with it being a peated whisky, there is certain areas that are more attuned to peat than others. But hopefully, with the flavour profile that we have, it might be opening up to areas that maybe not traditionally have been
Absolutely,
peated.
and which is great. The fact that you're able to do them in batches or outturns that are big enough that everybody can try it. And I think at the event, you're going to have your fantastic European sales manager, Daniel, there too, who's a great character and is a great... in fact, he will travel the world still talking about these products and talking about Fife.
I know. I mean, it's well. Look, we talked about Haddington House, Angus. To be able to sit there in Japan and say that whiskey there has got the town I'm from is on it, and I think.
Let me pull down the plastic 5-litre container off the shelf.
Yeah, I mean that's it.
Something different.
Aye, but with regards to your distillery, then you've taken us round. It's all. What's really interesting about it is it's all under one. It's actually quite a small area.
Yeah.
It's a small area. It's not the back shed in Dornoch Castle where you've got washbacks above your head, and that. But it's all very tightly contained, and there's
Very efficiently set
and
up.
there's so much going on. As an engineer, as someone who's been here since the building started, do you have a favourite area of the distillery where you maybe look at, or a favourite part of the distillery, because there's so much going on there?
Yeah, favourite. I've never actually been asked that question before. I think my favourite area now is when we go between the old wash still and the new wash still, to then look out the way to the location that we have, but also to turn around and look in the way, because when there was a gap there before we filled it, so now it is complete.
Yeah.
So now that everything that we want to be putting into the building is now in the building.
Yeah.
I remember that building being almost empty,
And
now it is
That's
full.
amazing.
That's where I see the progress.
And the things that like we point out is that you don't use a purchase mill. So what's the reasoning behind that? The big question I had all the way through the tour was why, right? So you've decided against going down the traditional route of a purchase mill. Now, Ross, tell us about a purchase mill so people who are listening know a little bit more about it, because
You've
it's
never been to a
something.
distillery. Generally, you've seen a
This
portrait. Well.
is the.
I feel like I've never been a tour guide before.
When you're building, when you're building Glenkinchie.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. It's a good point because they do have a Porteous mill. I feel like every tour guide that's ever worked in a distillery hates this part. You go, well, this is a Porteous mill. They were so good at making mills that they went out of business.
Now,
'cause they didn't break.
who was it that was on the pod that tried to say it? And I've desperately looked.
Yeah,
I desperately looked up that the guy.
conflicting opinion about this.
There's a, and it doesn't mention it, which is very, very annoying, right?
Yeah.
But there's a potential whiskey story in there, and I might try and find enough information and enough routes to try and create for an article for our new newsletter. But basically, there was a guest on the podcast. I think maybe were you on a trip? They talked about purchase mills. And we were asking about that, and they said that the problem with the purchase mill was they made them so good, and they were so efficient that they never broke down. So unfortunately, the company who made them, they went out of business because they didn't have this. And there was a famous conspiracy with light bulbs, where they basically said, "Listen, you have to make sure you don't make the same mistake that the guys that made the purchase mill made.
somebody
You've got
made a
to
light
make light bulbs with an issue so that every so often a light bulb
You've got to
will
replace
go off,
them.
so that they have to replace them."
It was like American cars in the
can't-
70s
there's-
being designed so they'd break down in 3 years'
Yeah,
time.
but
So
there-
everyone
I can't
would
remember,
buy
it was
a new
recent.
one.
There's
It was
a
recent.
movement, and there was it's
I
actually a
think
bit of
that
a
was
scandal.
was it maybe Simon?
I don't want to admit, but there was a scandal about it, and you can look into it. But unfortunately, everything I read, and I was desperately trying to filter the information to see if there's any mention of the purchase mill. There's no direct link of the purchase mill to that light bulb sort of conspiracy. But you don't have one.
No.
You've a hammer mill.
Yes.
So why? Tell me.
So it was to do with the opportunity and a vision.
Okay.
So with being a new distillery, we wanted to go with the quest for flavour. And as an engineer, you can only go so far with a mash tun. At the time that the distillery was being designed, Tinninuck Distillery in Allness was going for an upgrade. So a mash filter was available. And for a mash filter, you don't need a roller mill, you can use a hammer mill. So they go hand in hand. So when we were going around the distillery, I showed you a screen. So the screen is replicated in the neck
Ah, cool.
on everything we do.
So you've got
Because that is a
right.
design feature, because that mill enables us to be who we are. So it was opportunity, but also by having that equipment, it gives us the opportunity to do things differently. We're not constrained as much as you would be if you followed the traditional route.
And I will
See,
say,
I-
I'll advertise this. So we've got a mash filter, outdoor washbacks, insanely large looking because the way you normally perceive them, and Loman stills. If you don't know what those three things are, you need to watch this vlog that's coming after, because we're about to go into the detail
hang on.
of some of the questions we didn't ask in
Well,
there,
what
rather than going back through the distillery.
What I love, though, right, is the geekiness that this, like the fact that, like, you know, right, so Finn Thompson talks about on the bottles of Finn Thompson bottles, the bottle caps that he uses.
Ceramic,
It's a ceramic that was originally used for some of the bottles that his grandfather originally used.
Yeah.
Then you've got a situation where like there's a nod to different levels of that. History is the nod that he's given. You guys are just nodding to the engineering part of it.
Yeah,
Like, putting the fact that you're deciding that of the filter, you're deciding that's the nod you want to have on your
Yeah,
packaging.
it's what we differentiate. I mean, if you look at the bottle is the brand.
Yeah.
Well, the design and effort is so the MD can talk up and talk about it.
Yeah.
So the MDT here can explain a little bit about who we are
Yeah.
and what we're all about. I mean, we have on the net to replicate
Nice.
what we have for the mash filter. At the very bottom of it, this the foundation. Is
Even,
actually-
even bottle
is-
shape.
is
something-
InchDairnie Distillery. You can see it here. There is ripples on the side.
Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that.
So-
I
so-
thought my
so-
eye was going.
So the ripples,
Actually, no.
there's 3 ripples. So if you get a flat surface and drop liquid onto it, it gives you ripples. So that replicates the 3 M's, material, method and maturation. And where those ripples meet is where the magic.
Fife grown, Fife distilled, Fife matured.
Right, but it's what I love is after spending a lot of the afternoon and evening with you, Scott, is it's very easy, right? And I sometimes come across I could be a bit of a cynic on the podcast a little bit. Is like people that do things differently, and we could have met you, and you're like, oh, we do things different because we want to do things differently. We are InchDairnie, and we just want to do things differently. There's a reason behind all of it, right? And it's always a manufacturing of flavour element to it. It's like so, yeah. Instead, you could have just been like, well, you know what? Everybody uses the Porteous mill, so we just decided we'd have a hammer mill, right? Okay, but no, you've got a reason behind it, and then that not having a mash tun. I'm only just finding out what mash tuns is. It wasn't that long ago, Chuck, you were banging your head on one at the distillery.
The bump's finally gone down.
Yeah, and I thought I was being the Ross of the podcast when I was able to point out it was a louter system, and it was one of the first louter. It was the first louter system ever used. You're squeezing grain with rubber and cloth, and I urge people to watch the vlog to see this. But
Never seen anything like it before.
and you're the only 2, so it's Tina Nick and yourselves.
Teeny Nick.
And what is that something that you came across in your career that you decided that's what we should do, or was that always something that you thought?
So I joined the industry in 2006, and my first distillery was Glenrothes. Glenrothes Distillery is part of a group, and within the group is Tinnick Distillery. And then in 2014, Tinnick was doing an upgrade, so the mash filter that was there was up for sale.
And she
So
just
the-
knocked on the door and said,
So the
"Actually,
mash
I'll have
filter that is here is the same mash
That's
filter
cool.
that was in Tinnick. Now, maybe that's why I got the job, because I'd known it before. But I knew how it operated, and I knew that the versatility by having that equipment can give you for making whiskey.
But was it Ian's idea to have it, or did you suddenly say to Ian, by the way?
No, it was Ian's. Ian was proactive, and it was an opportunity that Ian saw.
And
Is he an engineer himself?
Yes, he is. Ian started off as a process engineer in Invergordon Distillery.
Okay,
You
well,
did,
Right.
you did mention though you're getting a new.
I'm
mash
I'm
filter.
getting the new plates.
Plates, right.
but
So
not-
how do you go about getting those made? Because it's something that's extremely bespoke. Is there a company that makes
Yes.
them? Yeah.
So the company that's Mura.
And is it used in any other industrial processes?
Well, the mash filter that you see, if you go to Tennant's Brewery in Glasgow,
Right.
you'll see 2 of them.
okay.
Because
We've been to Tennant's Brewery. We weren't paying attention.
they're predominantly used in brewing.
Yeah. Okay.
And they were much smarter than the people that made the Porteous mills, because they made that you had to replace them every
After
15
winter.
years.
Right, so then
The Dyson of their time.
That's it. That's it. But it is amazing the changes that you've made to production, because it is all efficiency based, but it's also efficiency and experimental based. You're using barley varieties that some people would struggle to use, time of year, etc. That you're able to do
Well,
in the mash filter that's more efficient.
since we had Jake Adcock on the podcast, and he went through the acronym for the whiskey making process, which I've used a few times because it has been the best way for me to remember MFDM, right? So is it malting, mashing, fermentation, distillation,
It's
maturation,
milling, yeah.
milling. Sorry, milling's in there.
Milling, malting, mashing.
Milling,
That's
no,
it.
malting, milling, mashing, fermentation,
We do this every like,
distillation,
4 podcasts.
and then maturation.
Yes.
Is that the same process that you guys follow, or am I going to have to come up with another one?
No, that's exactly the same way, because the fundamentals of each part of the process remains the same.
Doing the same.
You're
The
just
fun-
using different
The
equipment.
fundamental of the mashing point of view, I mean, the milling is just you getting access to the starch inside the corn. The mashing is just you converting all of that starch into sugar. The fermentation is converting that sugar into alcohol. The distillation then is concentrating up that alcohol, and then the maturation is the holding.
And Ross may be able to tell me this then. The next part of
hope
the
not.
question is, how many other distilleries are there where you're creating single grain, spirit, and single malt spirit in the
Not
same
many.
area?
Loch Lomond are the best known, aren't they, Scott? But I can't
Loch Lomond are the most known, But Loch Lomond are a malt distillery and a grain distillery together. Whereas we don't follow although we're producing a grain whiskey, we're not doing it the traditional way of using a column still.
Yeah, and how many, when the next question would be is, I don't know if Loch
But I
Lomond
believe
are doing
Emma
this.
Gordon are going to be opening a malt whiskey distillery on
Yeah,
their
but
site,
my
so-
question will be, how many of them are doing it under the one roof? How many of them are doing it under the one roof?
Probably not many. I mean,
Not many.
the Girvan site makes malt and grain, but Ailsbury might be in a different building. You know, etc.
I visited two in Japan that do that, grain and malt at the same place. So Fuji Gatemba and Miyagiko do it different ways. Miyagiko has a coffee still. So, but again, it's in the same site.
Well, that's. I mean, the next question I'd have is, when you're designing this and coming up with a concept, were you ever looking at how other distilleries did it? Like, would you say, there's a distillery in Japan that does both single grain and single malt under one roof. Let's see how they do it. Or was it all literally, let's just try and build it all ourselves?
This is all the brainchild of Ian Palmer.
Right.
This is culmination in his 40 years plus working in both grain distilling and malt distilling.
Yeah.
So when he was, as I said to you, when he was developing the business, it was about giving us the right equipment that gives us the versatility to produce the right flavour of
And as an engineer then, are you like, when Ian, who's the founder, and he's saying, I've just got this great picture in my head of like Ian wakes up one morning and he thinks, I need to phone Scott, and he phones you and says, I've had this great idea, what if we tried this? Was it like that, or was it a case of have you already had the blueprint set out exactly how you want it to be?
We had the blueprint for the concept. The next stage where I've been involved in is, now that we have the equipment, then what do we do?
Right.
So as we're talking about the InchDairnie single malt, when we're talking about incorporating the seasonality in it and the yeast, is about going through that stages and how we
And
can
I guess
do
you're
it.
still learning, Scott, even though it's been 10 years.
I'm still learning every day.
Yeah.
Every campaign that we run the rye, I learn something new about the equipment or about the processing of rye. And there's still opportunities that we are not yet used. We've not had a chance to really properly dive in.
Can I get onto? Can we start production?
Well,
now?
I've just got one other.
I was about to interrupt and ask, can we talk about fermentation?
Right, well,
Yeah.
the one thing I do
Just-
want to ask is,
okay.
the one thing is, it was very noticeable, and Ross did get a little bit excited. And actually, you have to give Ross a lot of credit for the vlog, is he didn't answer the questions after he'd asked the
I
question.
think I might have said, what kind of still is this?
No, but-
maybe I
but-
didn't.
so
No, I don't believe it.
We did see extra large
To be fair,
condensers.
very cool.
Yeah, I mean, so like, because the tomato episode, Libby Joe's standing there and he went, "What's that, Libby Joe? It's a condenser, isn't it?" and typical.
See, if you're Chuck or Ross and you see a Lomond still,
Yeah.
I think in another year of you doing this podcast, you'll realise how giddy
good, yeah.
we were and just why.
But
because it's a unicorn. It's spoken about. It definitely exists, but you never see them.
Well, that's it. But also,
Unicorns don't exist.
You guys were it's national animal of Scotland, mate.
Yeah.
Right? Check your passports on the front. But you got excited, and this is what's fascinating for me. And Angus has done more than I have. I've done the least distillery tours.
You're not a big production fan.
No. So when I see a really tall copper-looking thing, and Ross is like, "How big are your condensers?" Right. I suddenly see how excited he is, and then I kind of see Chuck like, "Bloody hell.
The camera's shaking.
Oh my God, the condensers are massive." So,
I'm crouched down trying to get
so it going on. So yeah, another decision that was made: extra large condensers, and they don't work like normal
Yeah,
condensers.
so when Ian was designing the distillery, he worked with Frilly, and Frilly and him worked together. They'd been previously working with each other in Starlow Distillery for making grain, so they know quite a bit. So as Ian was looking at, it was about how can we be a modern, efficient distillery. So by having the double condensers, it means we are really efficient from an energy recovery point of view using TVR.
So it's
But
TVR, sorry.
So TVR is thermal vapor recompression.
Oh, dearie me.
So
We know there's an engineer in the podcast.
from an easy point of view, we recover about 30-40% of our original steam energy back into the process. So it's really energy efficient. But by having two condensers, we're having a lot of copper contact.
Yeah.
So we're not looking for the sulphury notes. That leads you into a direction for a spirit. So it's all of these parts, the milling, the mashing, the fermentation, and the distillation is what gives us the complexity of the malts.
And that'll even change the body and the texture of your spirit, that extra copper content.
Yes.
Right, Chuck, I guess pass him your mic.
Can I ask one question before you start about fermentation?
Yeah.
So, we spoke a lot about rye. We spoke a lot about malt or grain malt. How much rye whiskey are you making?
So
Or how long are you making?
Chuck, can I have your rye? Because that's just going down.
So for the rye, we do 2 weeks of production.
2 weeks of production.
2 weeks of production, and that depends on how efficient and how good the process is.
Yeah,
But
have you
run
got a
for
silent season here? Or you...
We do. We have 2 1-week periods a year, one in April and one in October. So we run 50 weeks of the year.
Wowzers.
Yeah,
That's impressive.
Right, Chuck.
Charles.
Go daft.
Well, the first question, I was busy trying not to hit machinery while holding the camera. But when you were talking about your fermentation here, you were saying you're doing a 24-hour for 25% for fermentation?
Right, no, what we were saying is in a normal distillery, you do 1 charge of your mash tun to your washback.
Right.
Whereas what we're saying is we do 4 mashes through our mash filter to the washback. So we're filling the washback over a 24-hour period.
Filling it and then adding yeast and
So
filling it.
it's almost you're doing 4 mini mashes to get you 1 big mash.
the Solera mash.
Hi. I mean, again, the next question I have is please explain why you would do something like that, because in my mind, it's just another.
If
Is it down to the kind of size of the
Yes.
size of the mash tun?
so the mash filter is 4 tons. So you're replicating a 16-ton mash tun by going to 4 mashes into a washback.
What does that do to flavour? So if you've got a 24-hour ferment and then you add like an unfermented liquid on top of that, is there some...
So what you're basically doing, you'll get a small amount of fermentation,
Yeah.
but ultimately your pure fermentation doesn't begin until you stop adding
Okay.
the water on
So
top of
it's-
it. So then, like anything else, with yeast being a natural product, it wants to get comfortable before it starts reproducing. If you're constantly changing those conditions, it's not settled. So what you see, as soon as you stop the mashing process, the temperature increases because you're starting to see the fermentation.
That's a good question, because I was going to ask, okay, so then how long has that first quarter been in fermentation? But actually,
Yeah.
fermentation doesn't properly start until you've done the 4 quarters. Then you've got it. You've already had a bit of an effect there, adding bit by bit. How long will you then leave that full washback to
So
to
what we've found over the time is from that starting the stopwatch when you filled it, after 48 hours, fermentation is complete. And
So 24 hours of building up and then 48
hours. So we say there's a minimum of 50 hours for our fermentation. Sometimes we do a little bit longer. We do a shutdown, we do the silent season twice a year. But we don't empty the washbacks for the shutdown.
Oh.
We basically pause production, do a full week of the shutdown, and then restart again. So those 3 washbacks are getting 160 hours extra.
Okay, so for 2 weeks of the year,
Yep.
you're doing an extremely long fermentation.
And what does that do?
Nothing.
Right.
Really?
Nothing.
Oh, don't tell me that.
Yes, because, and it's to do with as I was explaining in the process when we were doing the tour, the clarity of our wort is
Yeah.
really clear. So when we are doing the fermentation, we are getting the reaction of the yeast specifically.
and so the first-
so being a stainless steel washback,
Yeah.
You're not getting any
I'm
bacteria
not getting
influence.
bacterial influence. I'm not then extending it more.
But I like what you said about yeast when you said it likes to get, being a natural thing, it likes to get comfortable before it reproduces. Graham, you recently became a father.
Let me tell you, I was very comfortable. But and the washbacks are outside. We've
Yes.
mentioned that. So you talked about the seasonality element of the 9 releases that you're doing, products. Does having the washbacks outside make a difference?
Yeah, I mean, for a good example is when we did the Rye Law for the first 2 years, we did them during December. It was because that's when they became available. But I wasn't happy with happy is the wrong word. I was looking for more esters, more fruits on it. So we then moved production to the summer.
Right.
Because during the summer we'll be able to get warmer conditions outside, so we can get into the temperature regions where I'm going to get more of that ester formation. So we've been running for 10 years, so we are learning how we can use the equipment to our benefit.
And does that make a difference when you're saying, like, for experimentation, because the problem you've got is you can't suddenly say, right, you know what, we're going to do the rye between March and June every year, right? Because if you did it like that every year, then what would happen if you suddenly said, hang on a minute, why don't we make the rye between July and September? So does that mean that with the 9 different variations that you're doing, do you always have to be chopping and changing to find it, or have you over 10 years?
So what we tend to do from a production point of view is we are very prescriptive in when we produce the campaigns. So the InchDairnie Spring is in roughly the same period each year. The same with the rye, because that enables me to plan my production, which means I can plan in the different yeasts, the different casks, the different grains. So,
which brings us on to that great point.
Well, I want to just your engineering background, and you've talked about the founder Ian. It sounds to me like Ian is the engineer of the harder parts of building, like the blueprint. You're saying it was all his. You're the engineer of the flavour. Am I right? Would I be right in saying that? Flavour engineer.
Forget Managing Director of Distilling, which is, by the way, it's a brilliant title.
Aye.
But Engineer of Flavour.
Well, because
I like that.
The way that you talk and the way that you speak about it, and I've been trying to work out. It sounds to me like the founder had the idea of. Exactly. Maybe you had a few inputs here and there, but I was like, no, I want to do it like this. I want to do that. I want to do the next thing. But you've come in, and it's like, right now I'm engineering the flavour of it.
So the engineering of the flavour was very much a collaborative approach.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of that was already Ian had the vision, but then it was down to the detail, and it was my role to make sure that happened. But there's a lot of planning and preparation needed to be done. I mean, if you talk about rye, it takes at least 2 years to get rye to a point that you can use it, because you've got to grow it first, you've then got to malt it. So there's a lot of planning and preparation leading up to that.
So we've spoken about yourself being the engineer of flavour, and when we spoke, we mentioned it on the vlog. If you want to go, you went into quite a lot of detail about how the InchDairnie. The spring it tastes different from the summer, it tastes different from the autumn, tastes the winter. You're producing different things. Now, you can obviously manipulate production to get different results, but also, I'm thinking more about the future. Is the other, you've got warehouses full of different casks with different things, so with different types of spirit. But then what you can do, obviously, is blend and bring them together. And is that something that InchDairnie is looking to do in the future?
Oh yeah, so we'll see like a winter autumn blend of.
So
we'll see.
I don't want to give anything. I don't want to give anything away.
I don't want you to give everything away.
We would like, what flavour is what we do.
Yeah, and you'll do big enough vattings.
So what I would like to do is do a single malt with a broad complexity. So by having the different seasonality in different casks, that will enable us to do that. But that's the sort of thing we're looking at now. That I've got samples that showed you to be doing, and it's all about learning and understanding. So
and you've got that advantage because you're already in 20 international markets with the rye law. You kind of have to do enough of your first ever official single malt that those 20 international markets can get access to it too, I guess.
Look, I don't want to take too much of your marketing jobs away from people, but I'm just thinking, when I'm drinking whiskey, I like to summer in Fife.
So, the method is the same. The equipment is different. Barley and yeast. Do you think it makes a difference?
Yes.
Now, a question I've got about, not pulled you up, but I have a question about your barley first before Ross goes into the yeast side of it. Now, I was always under the impression that winter barley couldn't be used as malt barley. Spring barley was malt barley. Winter barley was always feeding barley for the cattle and stuff like that. Is that changing now with the different variations and varieties that are out and the science that's there, or is it something that the distillery has the capacity to be able to do? And what would the difference be between using winter barley versus spring barley?
It's the combination of both.
Right.
That variety development is ongoing, but having the equipment enables us to process that. So when we talk about the spring and winter barley, the winter barley has a very much a more heavier spirit type. There's a lot more malt flavours coming through. The turbidity in the wort from the mashing is also increasing. So there's these small differences, and what we want to do is during the fermentation, the yeast we use, we want to concentrate
So there's no rules associated with that then, is there? It's not like you can't say you can't use winter barley to make single malt whiskey.
No.
It's just as long as it's malting barley.
Malted barley.
Right? Because that's the thing. I always get quite excited, from a farming background and stuff like that. Is like, when would you start, Chuck? When would I don't know? When would winter barley start being harvested? Roundabout.
I mean, we would only ever harvest barley generally August
time.
I think. So we didn't really harvest. We wouldn't really harvest anything in winter.
Right.
Just that it would be ready in August.
It'll be ready in August, and then spring barley, would that be already at the same time then?
In the I think. Well, as far as I'm aware, in Scotland you only get one harvest. I think internationally, more higher climates, you're going to get maybe you can get to Australia maybe.
Right. Okay.
But over here, the sun's the sun. And you get what you get.
A man knows his barley. So what is your preferred barley species that you're using for InchDairnie Distillery?
We're really going for it tonight,
Well,
lads.
that's a good one. I mean,
For your 30%, for the stuff that's coming officially from the distillery.
well, for the stuff that's coming officially from the distillery, although it's spring barley, we tend to be using the current variety because that's what's available.
Concerto, Diablo.
So you get Concerto, we've used Diablo, we've used what's available. The winter barley we used one called, it was Vessel, I think was one of the
Vessel?
Vessel was
Never
one of the
heard of
varieties
Vessel barley.
that we go to. So by working with the farmer and the supply from the Muntins, we have visibility of what's coming from. I mean, you've also got to remember that these varieties are all similar. They've just been grown differently. I mean,
It's probably something we've not covered on the podcast. Why is barley variety important to somebody that's making spirit? Because it's all about the yield, isn't it?
It's
Or
a
about
very-
the efficiency.
well, it's a very good question, and it's for us, flavour is the most important, rather than what the yield is going to be. So a lot of the progress on the varieties of the barley is about getting either more yield in the field or more yield in the distillery.
Yeah.
So one of the print laws that we have done is going back to a landrace variety of barley that we grew from a handful of seeds up to enough to run for a week.
That's
So
so cool.
it took us 6 years to get enough.
Yeah.
That's
And
so-
but then
that's amazing.
it's fascinating. It's funny from a like, look, if you're a farmer and you're growing barley, right? Then what you're doing is you dance to the tune that the biggest buyer is going to want. So you want to suddenly say, let's just say if it's Muntins, or just buying it direct from them, then basically you need to have that standard, that yield, etc. Because you don't know where it's going. It might be going to a Diageo distillery that they're maybe not fussy about. It's not so much about the variety of the barley and the yield that you're getting. It's about they are about the yield, rather than the flavour, because it's going into such a mass amount of barley. Whereas for you guys, you're literally saying, no, we are picking our barley from one farm and one farm only. So that means you're not as fussy about saying, you're not going to the farmer saying, your nitrogen levels are too low, or
I mean, there's still
Standards you've got to hit.
specification standards that you get, but for us, it's more to do with the quality of the grain that we get and the consistency of it.
And then yeast is not something.
I have to say though, when I went to see my dad, when I got back from my travels, he pulled up a bottle of your Rye Law out, and his mate Brune is a tatty.
Brune. I think he's been mentioned before in the podcast. Actually, shout out to Brune.
I don't know the name of his farm, so maybe one of your distillates are named after him. I'm not sure. His farm, but he's a tatty farmer, like within 10 miles of here, and he bought a bottle of that and was so pleased to rub it in my dad's face that there was good whiskey being made up here. But even my dad, who, I mean, drinks whiskey, he was like, this is good. And he drinks everything with 2 ice cubes, which is, his life.
Yeah.
I'm not going to shame him for his mistakes, but no, I'm only joking.
And so I was just about to ask about yeast, and I really don't know much about yeast, but obviously we spent a lot of time up north talking about it with a lot of new artisanal distilleries talking about yeast varieties. You're again experimenting with yeast for your different spirits.
Yeah. So for the Rye Law, we use a dried yeast that's specifically for that product and only that product.
Okay.
For the KinGlassie, we've also introduced an additional yeast. Again, the yeast is there for flavour, but for the KinGlassie, we use it with liquid yeast. Again, it's going to give you the conversion. So each of the seasons that we use for the InchDairnie, we use a different yeast type for it. So we've been working with our yeast supplier, and there's been a lot of work doing on it. And if I'm honest, an area I'd like to look a little bit more in. But at the very, very start, when we were developing the concept of the InchDairnie single malt, the seasonality that we got in the first year, we were happy with the quality of the liquid, so we didn't change it.
It's always dry yeast.
So it's always been dry yeast because we have the facilities to incorporate the dry yeast.
Okay. Can I ask about the James Eady project?
1920s.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to be able to taste some of the new make you did for that, which was super cool. But I was wondering, with the barley varieties and the yeast varieties for that, are you using any of those components?
And maybe we can explain what that is as well for the viewers.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't remember the exact. I had all the new makes that night, so the information gets a little bit blurry after a while. But any information about that would be.
So for that trial, we used winter barley, and we used ale yeast, and at the time, the ale yeast that we got was in the dried form. I would like to go back and try and do it with proper liquid yeast from a brewery, but given the size that we are, there's not that many breweries.
So what was this, James Eady? What was? Sorry.
I don't know. I didn't
So the 1920s project is where there was 6 distilleries, where we got the James Eady book. Was basically a historical review of distillation in the 1920s, and that was used as an inspiration for the 6 distilleries to go and do something, either using it as an inspiration or to replicate it. Cool. So we used it as an inspiration because one of the stills that's described within the book is very similar to our Loman still.
Right.
Unfortunately, we were in the process of upgrading the distillery, so didn't have a chance to actually use the Loman still. Right. But for the James Eady project, it's in line with what we were doing. You're using winter barley, which is not to be used, ale yeast, which traditionally distilleries and breweries work close proximity together. It was only as breweries either shut down or got really busy that distillers lost access to that very yeast. So that's where the yeast companies then came about, giving you distillers yeast.
There you go. Well, look, we're fast approaching now. What I would like to do is, I think, if possible, an opportunity to try both.
Yep.
The single. Now, I dare you to let Ross do a sniff it, sip it, score it 60-second whiskey review.
We can do that after. We can definitely do that after.
But no,
should we start off with raw?
We'll start off.
okay.
We'll start off with the double mature to start with. So I'll put my microphone down so I can pour your drum.
yeah, because one thing is, this will lead us on to the last part of the tour that we did, was where we finished off in the warehouses, and as I said, an exceptional way to end the tour, because you know what warehouses do to me. But you know, and we'll talk about the maturation process that you've used for both, because it's unusual. It's unusual for a distillery to decide to bring out not just one. They're just going to share that. Not just one release, but to bring out 2. So this one here, then, this is the.
So this is a double mature.
So double mature.
So talk you through it. So to start with, it is heavily peated malt, but we used Highland peat, not Isla peat. So the Highland peat is more on the more floral, more of the flowers within it. So it's more smoke influence rather.
The organic compound is different.
Different. The makeup's different.
Yeah.
So what we did, and it's the same with both of them, when we put them into ex-bourbon casks and left it for 5 years just to see how it was going. And then we took a portion of that parcel and put it into Amontillado cask, ex-seasoned Amontillado cask for 3 years. Yeah. And that's what we have here. So what we were trying...
What's Amontillado? Sorry.
So Amontillado...
I'm not very...
It's a sherry.
Right,
so Amontillado is a sherry.
Quite a sexy sherry.
It's actually an Andalusian wine. So there's a lot of lovely almonds and nuttiness that comes through from it. So what we were trying to do here is... An element you sometimes get in Amontillado is a bit of tobacco. So we thought that the tobacco and smoke goes so well together. So on the nose, there is a slight hint that there's something going on there, peatiness, but not as in your face
Again,
as you tend to get.
50 ppm, I
You
expect a
no.
big kick in
Now
the face.
the 50 so the 50 ppm is the 50 ppm in the malt.
Yeah.
Right.
On this distillate, you're getting about 18 to 20.
Right.
And we spoke about
Soft, gentle, lovely. I mean, that's a cracker.
It's very welcome in the nose. It's quite sweet on the nose.
And now this one, I believe, is available through the Royal Mail Whiskies.
That is correct.
So you can go into Royal Mail Whiskies throughout the whole of May, as you're listening to this, you're sitting there,
Get it online,
In
go to
store
the high
online,
street.
yeah.
and you can go and see that. Yeah, I think they're doing windows.
Yeah, they're doing window promotions.
What's the price of the double malt?
So the double Maturo is £79.
That's a bargain. And what Whisky Stories podcast listeners will get about 50% discount. That's
Very good.
your market guys looking at me going like, "What are you talking about? What are you talking about there?" But no,
So I suppose in here we called this velvet almond smoke. Is how we would try and describe what we've got.
that's.
Here.
I mean, it's absolutely delicious.
And what this is trying to do is, as I said, it's a velvet. That's what we came up with the velvet.
It's excellent.
What we're trying to do is that people have a vision of what peated whiskey is.
Yeah.
So what we want to do is, with the equipment that we have, can we change it? Now, as I spoke about, the fundamentals of who we are is the 3 M's.
Yeah.
So for the products here, we've got the material. In this case, we've got the peated malt. But for the products here we're showcasing is the maturation. So the liquid starts at the same point. It's only after 5 years we do some of it into Amontillado for 3 years, but the raw stays in the ex-bourbon for another 3 years. So that is 8 years in it. And the reason why I wanted to do that is understanding what maturation does on the spirit.
And also to champion the spirit that you've so...
And to
as
champion
we've
champion the
spoken this
spirit.
whole pod,
And is this now?
so you've made
Excuse
so
me.
many decisions.
Excuse my ignorance here, right? But will this be something that we can say? Is this something that was spring, summer, autumn, winter, or
So this year is using spring barley.
so? This is spring barley in this,
This the KinGlassie, the peated product uses the spring barley.
right? And with regards to making a decision to go peated, then you obviously that makes you stand out from the rest of the Fife distilleries. It's also
Or the lowlands.
a lot of the lowlands as well, but it's also it doesn't corner you into a marketplace because. Is that a conscious decision, or will we see other KinGlassie or InchDairnie releases that are unpeated?
Yes, I mean what we have here is 2 brands within our planned portfolio.
Yeah.
So we started off with the Rye Law, we've moved into KinGlassie. The next one may be Primrose. We'll see how it's
So you're going to be
maturing.
like the perfect back bar. You've got a rye,
Well,
you're going to have a rye,
yes.
unblended malt, peated malt.
What we are looking to be is from a single site a breadth of flavour
Yeah.
from different brands.
We
That's what we're
mentioned
looking-
other grain whiskies before we go into this. You done anything with corn?
No, not yet.
Oh,
Yeah.
I love that answer.
Yeah,
Not yet,
and
is
that's now.
And I'll just
Talk
talk about
about-
can I talk about the whiskey just a wee bit? You've listened to the podcast. Thanks for listening, by the way. I don't know how you put up with us, but you will have heard that I'm not a massive peated
No.
whiskey fan. On the nose, so gentle, so
Yep.
welcoming.
Yep.
The palate is so chewy.
Yes,
lovely.
yeah, it's lovely
and
chewy.
I've often said, if I can chew a dram,
Yeah.
that'll do it for me. And actually, I do think somebody who loves peated whiskey will love this.
Yeah, like me.
But even so, you say. You keep pretending to like it, but I find that so
I love it.
approachable.
Yeah, absolutely.
46.3%.
Yes,
Drinks really well at that strength as well.
just a little drop of
Yeah,
water.
like a wee
Just,
drop of water.
I'll just bring it out that little
Yeah.
bit much.
Answer.
And with regards to the warehousing then, so yeah, I got excited, right? Because when you arrive up here and you go through the lovely walk to get up to the distillery, I can't stress enough, with the greatest respect to the area of Glenrothes that we're in, to go from the transition of being in the middle of an industrial estate to then being in this. You could literally pick this distillery up and put it anywhere in Scotland and it will look like a picturesque distillery.
And the fact it's not open to the public, it's the most. I've been to distilleries open to the public and they're not.
And Ross did say, Ross did make a tongue-in-cheek, because Ross coming to Fife, he's getting nervous. He gets a bit hot under the collar. He doesn't like being out of his comfort zone. And
Even
things
though I'm
like
out with the King of Fife.
I know. Aye, right. And he didn't realise that we drove past Fife's airport on the way here.
I didn't know there was an
And he
airport
didn't even know
in
there was an
Fife.
airport in Fife. Of course, there's the Tipsy Nipper. I think it's.
Yep.
I love it. You get a nice, good macaroni and cheese in there. But Ross kind of facetiously said, "Oh well, look, you'll get the private clients flying in Fife Airport, and then brought up to this lovely through the gates into the distillery, and you'll be shown around." It is. We're in the boardroom here, and you look around us. It's a beautiful looking place, isn't
That's
it?
what I'm saying.
Yeah.
This is set up for when you and I are the private clients flying into Glenrothes.
Yeah, and
It's beautiful.
And I'm looking at it. You walk up, and I see 3 big warehouses, and you're looking at them, going, "Oh wow, they've got warehouses on site." And then it isn't until we came out of the back door of the distillery part, and you look around, and it's 3 massive warehouses.
Yeah.
With another, is it 3 or 4 behind it, or
Yeah. There's 4 warehouses in the front, which is original phase.
4? Yeah.
There's 3 behind that, and then we've got 2 new ones in the Westfield.
I mean, so that's
Even your
huge.
cask samples are wax sealed. I mean,
But so how many
everything's got
casks
lots of thought in
are
it.
stored on site at the moment?
And total for us and our third parties, there's 175,000 casks on site.
Massive.
And I have to ask you another question about the whiskey, because Ross, the first thing he said, and it's really your question, Ross, why 46.3%?
So
Because that's a very specific...
yeah, so how we came about, traditionally, well, for the Rye Law when we came out, we were doing a lot of tasting to understand where it's at. So 40 because it has to be 6 because of the 6 plates in the Lomond still, and 3 for the 3 aims. Okay, that's where the Rye Law came about.
So even that's like...
So then when we were looking at the KinGlassie, we did look at different points. We knew it was going to be more than 40%, more than 43%. And what we said is, let's try it at 46.3 in line with what we had here. And it just seemed to hit the mark. So it was very much a case of trial and error just to see exactly what we felt was the right one for the spirit.
So that's a double
touch
matured.
A little touch of water in there actually gives a slightly more lingering, smoky finish.
Really?
Yeah.
It's almost a slightly drier bonfire smoke finish.
We'll try it. So
I'm-
that's
I'm-
a double matured.
So that was
Shall
a double
we try
matured.
that?
Now,
I'm really enjoying the nose,
That's
and I'm
my
so disappointed I
that's
can't.
my wanky taste. that's my tasting note for this.
we'll give you a little...
Also, the
doggy
tops of the bottles are incredibly
Yeah,
heavy.
yeah. So if you look at the top of the bottle, there's actually...
Feels like a premium product.
It says there's actually the analysis of we've done the gas chromatography analysis of the spirit. Is what's
Of
in-
course.
The level of detail
Oh, of course,
involved.
And
of
it's the
course
same-
it's a
same-
cask
same-
chromonology.
Same as what we have on that one.
And you've got QR codes in the back
And
of the
we've got
bottles
QR
too.
codes as well that take you to the website.
Okay.
So for the raw, as I said, it was 8 years in the ex-bourbon cask to really understand the maturation, because the influence of the cask has been minimised. So what I'll do is I'll leave you, and this to me is, from a raw point of view, is more in line with what people think of as being a peated whiskey.
Right, and I mean, at the moment,
This
from-
one's clean. Thank you.
to see this at 8 years old, and to see, you can see the colour difference in that as well. Actually, you can see that. But
Wowzers.
So all of our spirit is non-chill filtered and
Naturally coloured.
coloured.
Was that...
Just the glass scratch now, maybe sugar.
The nose on that.
and this is available exclusively throughout the month of May through the Whisky Exchange.
That's correct.
And again, retail price for this
For
one,
the same is £79.
so 79
Sorry, £79.
pounds. So I mean, look,
For a first release.
for a first, and the thing is, the whiskey industry is in a bit of a situation right now, and everyone's talking about value for money, and everyone's clamouring for shelf space and what you can sell. And we've talked about the race to the bottom that we've seen with Woodrow's of Edinburgh doing
The
the
race for the top as
And
well.
yeah, and you're seeing that element. When it came to pricing whiskey, then where do you stand on that? Are you know, when you look at, I mean, another cost that I've spoken a lot about with indie bottlers is the bottle, and we've just talked about the level of detail in there. Everything has a cost,
Yes. And this is our brand. So
Yeah.
the bottle is the emphasis of the brand.
of course, and that will stand out on a shelf.
Yes.
When you look at that on a shelf, that will absolutely stand out on a shelf. The bottles look
I
fantastic.
think we've found the next bottle in Bobby Barr's collection.
Really, is this going?
Yeah.
Is this where it's
Yeah.
going? Is it?
He's an odd Big Ten fan. This is big. It's unapologetic. The nose. Do you know what I'm really surprised about? And this just shows the cynic in me. There's no youth on the nose.
No.
I was expecting spirit. To an extent.
That's delightful, and the colour. I mean, there's very little colour in there.
That's it.
Yeah.
It only
It's-
reminds me of young Ardbegs, like, because it's just got that.
Now, why 8? Because a lot of people will look at it and say, look, you want to bring out a
You're
release.
almost at 10.
An inaugural release, you either do an non-age statement, or you do 3 years, here it is at 3. Or you say, a lot of people will look at age statements and say the traditional age statement would be 10, 12, 15, 18, what have you. So why 8?
Why 8? Because when we tasted them both, we
We're
were
happy
really,
with
we're
it.
really happy with what we had. And we want to, we've been talking a lot about what we've been trying to do here, but a lot of that's been hidden within here.
Yeah.
We want to be bringing that out to people to talk about it, and so for us it was ready to go out at this stage.
Because a cynic often will say, like, you need to release whiskey at start. We've talked already about the challenges with running a distillery costs. So a cynic might say, "Oh, you need to get out quick because you need to start bringing some money in." But Chuck, you told a story in the podcast when you were at a tasting with one of the Cuthberts from Daft Mill, and where they decided to put their first release out. What was the sort of premises of that story again?
Yeah, it was actually at Raw Whiskies. They had their first public tasting. We got to go along, and someone asked that question, and he said, "Well, we've been making whiskey for 12 years, and we've been putting all the barley in by a wheelbarrow. So really, we want a malt bin. So that's where all the money's going to go with the sale of the first release."
So they're investing in the.
They're just like,
That's a great answer.
They decided that the reason we brought out our first single malt release was just because we needed a malt bin because we were fed up carton wheelbarrows loads of.
But then if you've met the Cuthberts, then that's so there. They're so matter of fact.
So the point is, like, look, you know, I would say that an 8-year-old is not a conventional release. You're saying, would you say 3, 5, or maybe wait till 10 or 12, etc. You're also saying you've already had the Rye Law out and you've been selling that. We've tried the KinGlassie, and you've got other products that are going out already, like your malting, your single malt that's used traditionally, predominantly for third party and blending. So it's not like it's like we just needed, like, we spoke to Ian Sterling, and Ian Sterling said the plan is not to put a release out until X, but you never know the way the industry is.
I think it shows the ethos of the marketing of the brand, which is they could have done these two first releases as non-age statements. They're both peated, and they both would have been popular.
Yeah.
Because you don't get youth on the palate, because the peated spirit does give an extended maturation to the spirit. But it shows if you're starting like this, you're going to continue like this. I would say double matured, more for my taste. But I know, my father being an Islay drinker, the raw, the fact that showcases the spirit you've created here absolutely would match up against any peated whiskey for that price point. No doubt. It just kicks my arse a little bit, which I think which by the way shows that it is right.
It's a big arse to kick as well.
I'm happy you said that, because that's exactly what we were trying to do. The whole fundamentals is flavour, and peated whiskey is very divisive. There's people who you either love it or you hate it. What we want to do is we wanted to bring something that for peated whiskey drinkers they would enjoy, but it'd also bring along the non-peated whiskey drinkers.
Because I wanted to compare them, but then I realised I actually already finished my double matured. So that, well, there you go.
Again, it's just, it has been the running theme of this evening, is why. But, so why 8 was the first question there. Why 2 releases at the same time?
It's a good question.
Because the concept was for here, because you have to have a plan and a concept.
Yeah.
And we were thinking when we were doing it, we would put some of it into the Amontillado cask, and that would go into the distance. But we kept some of it into the cask. When we tasted this,
almost a happy accident, really.
we tasted this, but it was about experimentation, wanting to understand what the spirit can do. So we had a plan and a concept for here, but we're also wanting to see exactly what that would do with age.
When
we tasted that, because it's in an ex-bourbon cask, there's nothing to hide behind it. It's just purely the spirit. So that's why we called it raw.
That's it. You could have called it. You even could have called it natural or whatever, but raw suits it because of its character as well.
That's exactly it. So why did we do 2? Is because by showcasing the difference in the maturation, we felt that the liquid can tell a story to someone. And there's people who love peated, who I think would be disappointed if they've got an expectation like everybody else about it, what it is.
Yeah.
This here is quite a enclosed, though it's lovely, velvet, smooth, sweet. Texture-wise, a bit in the smoke. But there's people who want peated whiskey, and they deserve to get it. So that's what that's for as well.
And you're no daft either, right? You're no daft, right? Because you're absolutely spot on. You brought these out, but you've got to buy 2 now, haven't you? Right, because what happens is you say right, you know what, the double matured is absolutely fantastic, but now you know. Also, if for another 80 quid, I can find out what it tastes like before it's been put into that, or away from that, or vice versa. You buy the raw, and you taste that, and you go, that's a banger. And you say, but you also know on the market, hang on a minute now, I know how good that is on its own in the bourbon, but what does it taste like when it's been matured in something else? Absolutely fantastic. And I would say,
apologise if it was already said and I just missed it, but how long was the finish in the Amontillado?
3 years.
3 years.
so it's not finished, it's a double maturation.
So that's why it's not finished, because 3 years is what you would normally call for a whiskey.
Now, believe it or not, we are fast approaching that time already where, and you know yourself as a keen listener of the Whisky Stories podcast, that we know now venture into our What 3 Drams feature for yourself, and I'd be fascinated to hear these. You know as well, when we have got somebody from a brand on, we do allow you one extra on brand if you want to go with that. So please tell me, Scott, what would be your What 3 Drams of?
So, well, the first and foremost, I knew about this, but you'd said that it would be some other time, so I wasn't as prepared as you think. For me, I joined the whiskey industry in 2006, and the first distillery I joined was Glenrothes. And at that time, my experience, like everybody else in Scotland, was being drunk in whiskey at an appropriate age and thinking I don't like whiskey. So when I was in Glenrothes, the Glenrothes brand changed to the Singleton of Glenrothes, and they put a little bit more influence on the sherry cask and as well as the bourbon. And I've got a slightly sweet tooth. Probably you can explain these. Yeah. And that's where I got whiskey. That's where I started to really appreciate and understand whiskey. So that's got to be my
What's the Singleton of Glenrothes?
Singleton, 12-year-old Singleton of Glenrothes.
Sorry,
Singleton of Glenrothes.
12-year-old Singleton of Glenrothes.
Not a product we get here.
Oh yeah. No.
You can get it
in Asia, right?
You can get it in Asia or at the distillery.
So would you go as far as to say then, if you had been on this podcast early doors, and Ross was desperately trying to shirk the title of the sherry tart, then he quickly put it on to me, would you say that was where you were at that point then?
Still quite fresh.
Yeah.
Is that a fresh one, right?
Yeah, Glenrothes a very grassy spirit.
Yeah, it's a green glassy. I mean, it does condensers. It does.
Don't worry about it.
I'm desperate to try and shirk that sherry tart. That's right. Okay, so dram number 2 then.
So dram number 2 would have to be Rye, because I absolutely love the brand. The fact when we did it, first produced the spirit in a pilot still here, I was the one that distilled it and tasted it, and it was tremendous. Yeah. And then when we did it on the full scale, on the Loman still, I was also there controlling it. So there's a bit of culmination of all that experience, but it's also been a fantastic dram.
And something I've absolutely... I've made my way through quite a few of the drams, and thankfully the guys beside me, they're drivers. So I've been having these, that Rye Law, I cannot stress enough, and you'll see on the vlog we did a sort of grain versus malt. Check that out, by the way, because it's worth watching. Because it is, you put that blind and say, tell me if that's a single malt or a grain whiskey. So many people say, that's obviously a single malt.
I would also say, and I'm not the authority on cool, believe it or not, but that's a cool whiskey brand, whiskey bottle. Rye Law is cool.
I like it.
And it's different, and it's trying to take a modern approach to
Brilliant.
whiskey.
Okay, your third dram here then.
You only had one on brand, by the way.
So does that mean I'm left with one, or can I do 2?
You can do 2. You can do 2.
Two more.
Yeah, because you get one on brand.
Only one can be on brand of the 2.
Look, you can do what you like.
That's so charitable.
So I like sherry. I like sweet. I've got quite a sweet tooth.
Yeah.
So I've got a variety of whiskies opened at home, and there's only 2 whiskies that I've kept within the original packaging, and that's almost like there have to be an additional barrier that I need to be, are you really sure you want to have that? So the first one for that is Glenfarclas 15.
Great dram.
I know Callum, and I think it's a fantastic dram. I think for flavour, everything just works at 15. I think it's just brilliant. So that's that one there. The last one, and how it came about is, I know quite a few distillery managers, and I was up in Speyside, and we ended up going to the mash tun in Aberlour.
Oh yeah.
And we went in there and we asked for a flight, and we said that it has to be 15 years old, it has to be 100% sherry matured. Tell me, give us it. So that's where we got the Glenfarclas. But the other one that I got was the Glenlivet, 15, which you can only get in abroad. You can't get it in this country. And that is the only other bottle where I had to put it in the box because I did finish it too quickly.
Glenlivet 15 sherry.
Sherry, 100% Oloroso. That is my, and I think it was just, every time I drink it, I go back to that tasting with my friend, and that's what I love about whiskey. Whiskey is very emotional, but it also brings you back to a certain place in time where you remember when Glenord, when I remember it, and people.
And is that a kind of region-specific malt? Because I know they have ones that are kind of Taiwan exclusive.
Oh, it's a Taiwan exclusive one.
Taiwan exclusive,
Yeah. So
but I think if you went up to the distillery, they might have it.
no, you can get it in the distillery.
Was Curtis Moran? Does he not mention the 13-year-old?
It was me. It's 30. I've got a bottle in the house.
13 Glenlivet sherry.
It's like Coca-Cola. It looks like Coca-Cola. It's just dark. Listen, what an afternoon and evening we've had.
What was your favourite, Graham, out of the two?
I've left the two of them because
I think you were edging towards the raw.
I would say raw after.
So you've got to go on the Whisky Exchange for your raw.
I've got to go Whisky Exchange. What, about 80 quid we're talking?
Yep. So that's £79.
And just
160 quid, double up. You're better doing it because there's no point in having one and not the other in the house. And you need to sit down and actually sit and having them as a side by side. Definitely. Ross has said adding a little bit of water really opens up opens them up.
And just going by the nose, I'm just desperate to try the double mature.
Yeah.
It's
well,
like peat and sherry. It's a bit.
If you are listening to this podcast, this is already out for release, and you can get hold of it. And of course, if you want to try it, and you're sitting there thinking, I don't know whether I want to commit to that, buy a bottle or anything like that, then get into the link and buy yourself a ticket for our first ever distillery spotlight, where we'll be joined by Daniel Cunningham as well, who's going to be there. I think he's going to be there. He's looking at me going, am I? But he's maybe going to be there to talk us through this as well. We'll be hearing all about it, and we'll be doing at least a 5-dram lineup for it. You know what the indie bottler spotlights have been like. This will be the first ever distillery spotlight event that we've done with a distillery at the Diggers.
That you will not have had.
Friday the 23rd of May. But as I say, if you're listening to this podcast, these releases are already out, and this has been a huge... Scott, thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for coming.
But also, you're our first ever sponsor of the Whisky Stories podcast. You said to us that we're making a little bit of history by being able to come in as guests and getting a look around. Well, we're reciprocating that as you are the first ever sponsor of the Whisky Stories podcast. So thank you so much, and we'll be discussing the drams. We'll be talking about this. You'll get it in the newsletter. You'll be hearing all about it throughout the whole month of May. It's great. 8th of May, released. Get involved. You can get to the raw amount of whiskies for the double matured. You can get the raw on the Whisky Exchange. It's well worth it. Thank you so much for having us. Don't forget that you can check out the video blog, the vlog. Big thank you to Andrew Davies, who's standing here. The first time we've ever brought in a professional, believe it or not, to follow us around in the camera. ADHD, is it ADHD Media? ADHD Media, check them out because you'll be able to see all the work that Andrew's done. And hopefully when
Charles Kerr, thank you once again.
No, Charles Kerr, from an amateur's point of view in the camera.
He did not hurt himself today.
And when we went into the warehouse, there was loads of puncheons sitting around and he managed to avoid them completely. And the good thing is as well, because you've got that mash filter, he didn't bang his head. No. And that was great there.
Watch the vlog. I seen a Loman still.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for having us. Thanks for give us 5 stars. Listen, watch, check the YouTube channel out. There's so much stuff going on. And of course, subscribe to the newsletter as well. That's what we're all about. Get on the newsletter. Get everything and get yourself on.
In a few weeks' time, we're going to get your questions and ask your questions to Scott on the newsletter.
Yeah, we'll get, because we are every single week we're doing a newsletter where we have a previous guest on. We do a featured version. Angus is going to start doing Angus's dram of the week, right? Angus is going to start doing Angus's. He didn't know that until I've just mentioned it there. Angus is going to start working on it. Yeah. Big thanks to Angus for driving us tonight as well. He kicked the arse out of it last night at the Glen Scotia tasting, so he's got to drive us in. Well, listen, guys. We're going to enjoy the rest of these KinGlassie releases. I'm going to steal that bottle of Rye because it's an absolute banger. Thank you so much for having us. Thank you very much for listening. Thanks very much for watching. Cheers. All the very best. Cheers.
Cheers.
Well done, guys. Done it again.